Well, this morning I'm going to talk about leadership a little bit, and I hope that you will dialogue with me a little bit. Um, I don't like to lecture, and I'm not very good at lecturing. Um, but this is a subject that to me is an extremely important one. I have a great passion about leadership, and that's probably because um, I've been in that sort of position for most of my life in leading companies and divisions of companies. And over the course of that life, particularly probably the last 40 plus years, I probably have read way over 100 books on leadership. Most of them, when I look back, pretty poor, pretty poor books. And some of them coming from great experts or supposed to be experts. They sell many, many books on leadership. I hesitate to say, but most of the leadership books coming from Christian people are really weak on what leadership really is. But let me start by asking you this. The word leader and leadership come into my ears probably several times every day almost. And so I wonder what is meant by the term leader or leadership. We can talk about how Damian Lillard is the leader of the Trailblazers. We can talk about the leaderboard. Am I in the wrong place? You want me to write? Oh, that's right. I forget you got people on screen. They talk about in golf the leaderboard. So what does that mean? What does leader mean? Or we talk about Amazon as a leading company in this world today. We talk about the fact that the president is the leader of the free world. So what in the world does that term leadership or leader really mean? So I need some dialogue, and I want you to respond to me here, because it won't go well if you don't do that. I'll bore myself and you by just repeating information. When I say who is a great leader and why, who, if anybody, comes to your mind just quickly? John?
Jesus.
Jesus, certainly.
Moses.
Moses? Okay. Why was Moses such a great leader?
He listened and obeyed.
Okay. Other examples we can think of? Abraham Lincoln. Why?
Courage.
Yeah, courage. How about Hitler? Was he a great leader?
Yes.
Yeah. Some would say so. I'll come back a little later to tell you why I think he was just the exact opposite of that. But he showed some leadership qualities. Clearly, he made things happen.
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King?
Martin Luther.
Yeah, Martin Luther. A lot of great leaders back in that whole, when you think back over the spectrum. You also see people that are put in positions of leadership today who are very weak. And you would say they're not leaders, and yet they're leaders because that's their supposed role. Well, there's some definitions out there, and I personally think that leader and leadership are words you cannot define. There are a lot of words I believe you cannot define. Look at the fruit of the Spirit. Define for me love, joy, peace. How do you define those words? And yet you know what I mean when I say peace or love. How do you know that? Because you have experienced it. You have seen it in action. You see love that takes place. Some of the things that Dan was talking about earlier. Look at the love of just helping people to simply get some clean water and not see their children die because of filth that came out of the water. Well, here's some definitions. If you want a definition, a leader is the one in charge, the person who convinces other people to follow. That comes from vocabulary.com. A person in control of a group, a country, or a situation. Now, there's some reality to that. And yet, are they really leaders, or are they just in that position? Because I want to talk about what a leader is, not what the position is. A leader is someone who can see how things can be improved and who rallies people to move toward that better solution. That's our chief learning officer. So what is all of that? How do we come back to defining a leader? Or how do we define leadership? Well, here are some definitions of leadership. Leadership is about mapping out where you need to go to win as a team or an organization, and it's dynamic, exciting, and inspiring. Pretty good description. Not bad. The only definition of a leader is to someone who has followers, Peter Drucker. Now, see, there's an old-time management expert. And how can you argue with that? If you don't have any followers, you're certainly not leading anything. But I think it goes a little beyond that. Leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others toward the achievement of a goal. That's out of Forbes magazine. Again, pretty good description, I would say, of what a leader really is. And by the way, to go back to what was being discussed earlier, when it comes to culture, if you're not a good leader, you're not going to have good culture, because the culture, I think I've said this before to this group, culture comes from the leader. And it's what that culture is. Look at some of the people under Hitler who did some horrible things because that was the culture that came from him. Those were people who were almost robotic and didn't even realize the bad things they were doing because of the culture that came from their leader. So how would we describe then a leader? Well, he's one with a vision for change, the ability to communicate the vision to all the stakeholders and align the necessary resources to accomplish the vision. Now, I told you that I've studied and taught leadership for just a few years, but studied it for a long, long time. And I come back to this description of a leader that comes out of John Kotter. It showed up in his first book written probably 30 years ago, nearly, called Leading Change. And he's written several books since then. John Kotter's an interesting guy. He's a longtime professor at Harvard Business School. He, though he's an academician, he nonetheless has been out in the real world untold hours. He and his team go out to all of the larger companies and some smaller companies and observe, take their theories and bounce them off the situation. And so as I read his continuing books, and he's written 6 or 7 or 8, I find that he continues to develop that idea. So I want to think that through with you carefully. A leader is one with a vision for change. Now let's stop there for a second, because change, I believe, is inevitable. Change is inevitable. I will say that again and again. And so what are the things you can do about change? I think there are 3 things you can do. You can resist change. You can go along and just follow the leadership or whoever is making the changes happen, or you can create it. A leader, I believe, is one who creates the change. I remember back in the early days of Medicare, that's a long, long time ago, but I was the manager of Medicare in 2 states, one of them being Oregon. So I went out and spoke to a lot of physician groups, and they were all complaining about government getting into well, it was all new, a lot of it was undefined. And I remember preaching to them over and over and over again. This is change, it's coming, it will be. What are you going to do about it? You can resist it, you can let the government run it, or you can get in there and figure out how to get ahead of that game. Now, to me, that's what a leader does. They think about change and they get a vision for that. I keep harping at my own church. You've got a great mission statement. What's the vision? I remember telling my pastor one time, come out and stand on the curb in front with me and look at this property and dream about what it could look like here 5 years from now. What could be going on in just 5 years? That's what a leader does. They have a vision for change, but then they also have the ability to communicate that to not just the people who work for them, but all the stakeholders. To be able to go out, when I was running Moda Health for many years, I had this vision, and I wanted the people to know that. I wanted the doctor's offices to know it. I wanted the employees to know it. I wanted the individual policyholders to understand what it is that we wanted to do different than other people were doing. And then to align the necessary resources to make that happen. There's no point in having a vision, communicating if you don't make it happen. And so you've got to have the equipment and the people and the building or whatever in the world it takes to make that vision happen. I think I'm right when I say that Lee Iacocca was the man who had the vision for the minivan. And remember how popular the minivan still is with people in my family with young kids. Just wonderful, because they can have all kinds of room in the back for the kids. And he communicated that vision, but his company, Ford Motor, said, we're not interested, even though he had the same vision for the Mustang and made that happen. So he goes over to Chrysler and they become immediately the forerunner in all of the thing of minivans. So his guy had a vision. He communicated it. Some of the stakeholders, most important ones, the shareholders, didn't go for it. So he took his vision somewhere else. So to me, that's how you describe a leader. So again, you think about that. Is that Damian Lillard? I don't think so. Is that the guy who wins the golf tournament on a given Sunday? I don't think so. And yet those are words that we use there and call them leaders. And I want to be sure that you really understand what I'm saying, because all of you are in positions of leadership, but are you leaders? That's the real question. Because if you're not, then all of what was talked about here a minute ago doesn't work. And so how then do we look at who a leader is? Well, I just said the leadership is like the leader is one who has the vision, makes it happen, acting like a leader, and having followers, by the way. You can't be a leader without any followers. That just isn't automatic. But let's think for a minute about the difference between a leader and a manager, because those two are quite different roles. The leader, remember, has the vision for change, communicates it well, and then aligns the resources. The manager comes in behind that, and the leadership is setting direction, but the management is doing the planning and the budgeting and all of the busy work, if you will, of making things happen. The leader involves aligning the resources. The manager involves the organizing and staffing of the whole place to make it happen. Leadership provides motivation, management provides control and solves problems. Now, those are two distinct roles, and John Cotter makes those so very clear. And by the way, he has an old, if you have access and are interested to the Harvard Business Review, there's an old article from way back called "What do leaders do?" or "What leaders really do?" Something like that. And I think you can get that free off that. It's very great, about a 6-page document that really goes into this carefully and thoroughly, and yet very simply. The fact of the matter is that many, and most of us, have to be both a leader and a manager. And that's an interesting concept, because we're going to get in a moment here into what are the traits and the characteristics of the two, because they're quite different. Managers tend to be people that can they use spreadsheets and all of that. And for leaders, and I'm working with a group who are looking to find a new leader, and there's some engineers in this group, so they do this on a spreadsheet. And I'm thinking, this isn't an engineering project. You're going out searching for somebody, and you want to find certain qualities of leadership, if nothing else, to say nothing of ability to preach, because this happens to be a church. So many times you have to do both, particularly in smaller. When I first went with Moda, we had 23 employees. Well, needless to say, I was also the manager. But as we grew, then I had a manager over the claims area, another manager over accounting, rather than just a bookkeeper. So as organizations grow, then management becomes more complex. Are leaders born, or are they trained? That's a fascinating question that goes around in academia and in business a lot. Are leaders just naturally born, or can they be trained? My answer to that, yes. That's really the fact. The best are born with significant leadership traits, and we're going to get to that in a moment. All are blessed with some of these traits. I believe everyone probably, there may be exceptions, but most people have some of the traits of leadership. And then spiritual gifts are an enhancement of those natural gifts. And that's an interesting thing that I want to talk about a little bit. But think about, for instance, musicians. How many of you play the piano? You believe anybody can probably learn to play the piano?
Sure.
Yeah, I think just about anybody could. Now, they're not going to go down and get on the concert stage as the Schnitz, but I believe they can learn to play the piano. My mother never had a piano lesson, but when I would sing, she accompanied me. And when we would practice, she'd say, I think if we drop that down a half key, it would be better for your range, and she just modulate down into that. Now, what was the difference there? She had certain talents, certain gifts of music that came from God and came with her at birth. Whether she's a Christian or not, she could do that because God had given her those traits and those talents. I think about the cello, and then I think about Yo-Yo Ma. And anybody can play the cello. 3 people might be able to play like Yo-Yo Ma because he has a lot of different traits that come from God-given abilities that are given to him. So I say all are blessed with some traits and can learn to play the piano. There are others who are blessed with many, and they just play better. And then spiritual gifts are enhancement of those, and as I say, we'll talk about that. What are some of the traits of leaders? Well, there's a few. And if you think some of those through, you'll see honesty and integrity. We're going to come back to character because if character isn't there, as I said earlier, nothing works. A good communicator, creative and innovative, high level of EQ, transparent person, confident, commitment, empathy, resilience, humility. Humility is interesting. I suspect many of you read Jim Collins' books, Good to Great. What's often overlooked in that book is the levels of executive leadership that he talks about. And he comes to something he calls executive level 5, where he says that the leader is a highly egotistical person, but ego about the project that he's running, that there is nothing about it about him. It's all about that project. And I remember when I read that book years ago, and I didn't even see that. And I came back to that about a year or so ago, and I thought, without even realizing that, when I was at Moda, it was always about the company, how it looked, how it grew, how confident we were out in the marketplace. And it was never about me. And I think that's because I'm a Christian, frankly. I think that's a part of being a strong believer. But so that there's ego in there, but it's expressed in different ways throughout that. And so I say it's about character. This was mentioned earlier, it's about moral values and how we implement those. I had the values of our company listed, and every one of them I could have put a scripture verse alongside of them, because that's where my value system is. So that's where the culture of the company was based upon that. There needs to be a servant resolve. That's what this ego, about where the ego goes. I can remember early in a company when we had 23, 25, 28 people. If I walked by the mailroom on a Friday night and saw rapid action going in trying to stuff envelopes, believe me, I was in that room helping stuff envelopes. It's just natural. Why wouldn't you do that? Why would you go home leaving these people down there to do that? So there's a servant element of that, and as Christians, that's automatic. Or I question the level of our faith. There's a constant and consistent example that has to be made. My dad taught me, son, always go a little early, stay a little bit late. And I practiced that. I was never quite the first one in, because you always had some weirdo that got there early, and I was always to gym early and couldn't get over there unless before 7. And then you stay late. Not a lot, he said, just don't make a big issue so people say, oh, look at him. But that's the concept of being a consistent example. And then acknowledge sin or errors where you make mistakes. And I'll tell you, it took me as a young man a long time before I could do that. Now, when I'm able to say I made a mistake there, it's one of the most refreshing things in my life, is to be able to admit that I did this wrong and I want to make it, I want to make it right. So those are some of the character issues that I believe are involved in leadership. So then what are the characteristics of leaders? Well, there's a drive for responsibility and task completion. Boy, I relate to that. There's risk taking. If you're not taking risk, you're not going to be a very successful leader. There's self-confidence, a sense of personal identity, a willingness to accept consequences of decisions and actions, a readiness to accept interpersonal stress, and an ability to influence other people's behavior. Those are some of the characteristics that I see exhibited in true leaders. So in summary, leadership's difficult to define. much more easily described as I've tried to do. A leader is one with a vision for change, ability to communicate that, and then to see it happen. A leader has some innate traits, some of those things that I listed. I think you could look up there, if I leave it up there longer, and find several of those traits that you believe you have. Some will have 2 or 3, some will have them all, maybe not all, but nearly all. And then the significant leaders are rare. Just like there is only one Yo-Yo Ma, there are only very few who are really strong, solid, significant leaders. Gee, I left out, and I need to do that. This whole issue of spiritual gifts. I've been in the church all of my life, and I've been taught spiritual gifting, I don't know how many times. And I think in the main, it's always been wrong. It's always been usually been aimed at trying to get you so that you will sign up to work in the church. We need Sunday school teachers. We need nursery workers. I remember one church that I went to, and the membership thing was about spiritual gifts and trying to help you find your gifts so you'll know what you do as you come in as a new member. And when the course was done, it was 4 weeks. They had a list over here to sign up for some vacancy they had, some need they had. Well, there was no relationship at all. I find that my gift is this, and they want me to do the exact opposite. I couldn't teach young children in church if my life was at stake. I mean, human beings are not human beings until they're at least 15. I mean, babies are born in my household, and everybody wants me to, I don't know, that baby, I'll break it. I just don't relate. So here's what I believe about, and I can do this quickly. Here's what I believe about spiritual gifts. I believe that they are given to us at the time of conversion when the Holy Spirit enters our life, and that they are purely enhancements of the natural gifts God has already given us, together with the empowerment of the Holy Spirit to make us do them better. Let me give you a quick example. And this is not leadership, but it's the same concept. In Exodus 31, starting with verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, now they're just getting ready to get started. See, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Judah, and I filled him with the Spirit of God. Now remember in the Old Testament, God had to do that. He would have to fill a given individual. And I filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut, set stones. And he went on, you look about 3 chapters later, and he's out there setting up this whole scheme of the tabernacle by himself with some helpers. Now, the Holy Spirit came upon him and caused him to do that. Quick personal example, because it's even more clear to me. I have many gifts of leadership, and they've been shown in every area of life where I've worked. By my second year of my career in business, I was already managing a regional office on my own. Now, that's because God gave me a lot of gifting. When I was a kid in school, I went to school, lived down in Salem. I never was involved in one element of leadership, not one thing. In fact, nobody in that school even knew I existed. I was in the band. I was the leader of my, I was the first chair in my particular area, but nobody knew who I was. I had no leadership ability shown at all. At age 16, I went off to college, went to a Christian school, first week committed my life to Christ, and immediately became a leader. Immediately became a big man on campus and a leader. And then I saw all of his leadership in my adult life. So I look back and I say, what the Apostle Paul is trying to tell us is that God's not going to take those gifts. He's going to magnify them and enhance you for what? For the work that God gives you to do. And this whole area of the theology of work is so critical. We ought to talk about that someday, Mike, because I will hold out to my dying day that what I did in this world was every bit as important to God as my pastor. And I'll tell you, I had a whole lot more contact with non-believers than my pastor ever did. Every day of the week, more than he would in months. So the theology of work is interesting, but just think about that a little bit, because that's maybe something you've not heard before, but let it sink in a little bit. That spiritual gifts are an enhancement over natural gifts, and then the empowerment of God to really make it happen. And that's what leaders, that's where the traits of leadership now get enhanced, and away we go.